Hello, my name is Nicole Wilson. I'd like to welcome you to this conversation about mummies and their tattoos from Three Kings Tattoo in Brooklyn on the occasion of an exhibition currently in the space called Ötzi. In 2016, I worked with tattoo artist Matt Moreno to tattoo Ötzi, who's the world's oldest natural mummy. His tattoos onto my body in my own blood in this exact space. I documented the tattoos as they faded for the last 4 years, and the work now exists in a series of 15 images, an artist book designed by Bryant Wells and published by Small Editions, a special edition that contains the artist book, digital prints, and a screen print of a drawing made in my blood, and digital files of Ötzi's tattoos, which can be used to make Ötzi's tattoos on your body and are registered on the blockchain through Fairchain. This work premiered at Praise Shadows Art Gallery in Boston last spring and will be up in the Brooklyn space here through November 20th. You can find out more information about the project at otziproject.com. That's OTZIPROJECT.com, and or follow up with Praise Shadows or Three Kings for more information. The work will travel to Three Kings Los Angeles in January and the Three Kings London in June. And with that, I'd like to introduce Albert Zink, the director of the Urac Research Institute for Mummy Studies, and Iceman in Bolzano, Italy. Born in Munich, Germany, Dr. Zink received his PhD and finished his habitation at the University of Munich. He's responsible for the scientific investigation of the well-known Tyrolean Iceman, and he directed the major recent research projects on the 53-year-old mummy. The Institute plans and performs studies on mummy collections from different parts of the world, including Egypt, South Korea, South America, and Europe. He is one of the major DNA consultants for the genetic and radiological study of the young pharaoh, Tutankhamun, in which his parents would have been identified based on genetic fingerprints. He specialized in the molecular detection of infectious diseases in ancient human skeletons and mummies by using ancient DNA technologies. His major scientific interest is in the evolution of infectious diseases and the impact of diseases on historic populations and their development. He is one of 3 editors of the Journal of Biological and Clinical Anthropology, a German scientific journal. He's published more than 100 scientific articles and has written several books on paleopathology and mummies. So Dr. Zink is going to talk to us for about 15 to 20 minutes. Please feel free to ask questions along the way, and then I'll bring them up afterwards and when we open things up for the question and answer. And Dr. Zink, Albert, I'll let you take it from here, and I will start the slideshow.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind introduction. I'm happy to join you today in this, for me, a bit unusual place. But I'm happy to talk about mummies, and in particular on tattoos that were detected on mummies. And I would first like to tell you a little bit about my institution where I'm working. So maybe you can directly go to the next slide. As Nicole said, we're the Institute for Mummy Studies, so we are mainly working with mummies from all over the world, but we're also dealing with human skeletons. So we have these 2 types of material or resources for our research, mummies and skeletons, also from different areas, from the local area here in North Italy, but also we work a lot in Egypt that you see on the picture on the right side. And we have 4 different areas of research in our institute. We're dealing on the one hand with conservation of mummies and skeletons. It's very important also to deal with this aspect, because the conservation of mummies in museums, in storage facilities, in collections is very important, because we really want to conserve and preserve the mummies for a very long time. And sometimes this is quite challenging, and that's why we are doing a lot of research in this area. We have an ancient DNA lab. We do a lot of molecular analysis on mummies to understand where they are coming from, the age, the sex, whether they had some infectious diseases. And we're also dealing with things like microbiome research, so the stomach content. So a lot of things that you can really learn still from the mummies. We have a modern DNA lab in case we're dealing with modern samples or where we want to test some approaches. And we have an anthropology lab where we study the ancient skeletons. And from there on, we also apply different technologies, radiology, CT scanning, and also these molecular approaches. Next slide, please. So I just put this slide on because I want to make you understand that mummies are very different and coming from all over the world, because some people think when talking about mummies mainly about Egyptian mummies, the well-known like Tutankhamun. You see the this golden mask here on the left side. These are maybe more well-known, and some people think these are mainly mummies, but in fact, we have mummies all over the world. We have mummies that are conserved differently. Some were embalmed, like the Egyptian mummies. Some were naturally mummified, like Ötzi, what we talk later. But we also have mummies found in churches, bog bodies. We have mummies from South America, from the deserts, from the mountains. So there's a lot of ways that you can get to a mummy. And in the next slide, you see also a map where you can find mummies all over the world. So as you can see, you can find them in all places, in all different areas, geographic areas, from the far north. These are more ice mummies, to desert mummies, to mountain mummies, bog bodies, especially Northern Europe. Even in Australia and Asia, you find mummies. So mummies is, we can say this, a worldwide phenomenon. Obviously in areas where it's a very humid and hot environment, like in the tropic areas, there are a less probability that you get a mummy, because this is not in favor for the conservation of a mummy, because in principle you always need to have a rapid desiccation of a body so that it's conserved, and this can be acquired by either a natural mummification when the environment is in favor of this, or if you enhance it by doing an embalming procedure like it's done in the Egyptian mummies. Next, please. So coming to the tattoos, so it's long known now that also in previous cultures there was tattoos applied to people, and the mummies are the only ones that show us this to us, because there the skin is preserved. In skeletons, for sure, we cannot find any more the traces for tattooing. So we really need the mummies to understand where and how tattoos were applied in different cultures. And here I show some pictures, and then I talk more detail on the Iceman. So these are some examples from, one is on the left, is from a Sudanese mummy, so from Sudan, from Northern Africa. This is a mummy that dates to 700 CE, so it means it was already the Christianized period. And this symbol on the skin of this female mummy, a young female mummy, was a monogram written in Greek language, and this reads Michael. And Michael, this refers to the Archangel Michael. So it was a Christian symbol that was tattooed on the thigh of this female mummy. On the right hand, we have a mummy from southern Peru, and she had different tattoos on her body, including on the hand. From this Chiribaya mummies, they were farmers, pre-Inca period, so 900 to 3015. And she had different symbols, decorative tattoos that depicted animals like birds, reptiles. That was more a decorative tattoo that was shown on her body. Next, please. So here are some more examples from mainly, let's say, artistic tattoos. A very impressive example is this left here, the Princess of Ukok, also known as the Inca, not the Inca, the frozen maiden from Russia, from the Altai Mountains. She was, there were two more male mummies found that also showed tattoos, but she showed a very rich tattooing all over her body. These were mainly animals, so like mythological deer-like a creature that was painted on her body. And it is believed that they use these tattoos also as a kind of personalization of the person, that they can recognize each other even in afterlife. And what is also interesting, what you see in the lower left image on the back, on the central back along the spine, she has also some just simple dots. And this is a hint that they also use tattoos not only for decoration, but maybe also for a kind of treatment, what I would talk more in detail later on the Iceman. So it seems to be they used tattooing here for both purposes, for decoration and also for kind of therapy for maybe some back pain problems. And on the right, there's another mummy from China, from the Tarim Basin in China, where they also have very decorative tattoos with different kind of symbols here on the hand. and also on other parts of the body, also here in Asia. But it's much later than the earliest tattoos we have, especially also that what we see for the Iceman. Next slide, please. So then two examples from Egypt. Also in Egypt, there's a long-lasting tradition for tattooing. The left picture is from a female mummy from Deir el-Medina. This is in Egypt, close to today Luxor, which dates about 1000 BCE, so 3000 years ago. And she has several tattoos, and one is on her neck. And this shows some lotus blossom and also the so-called Wachet eye, which is a symbol that is made for protection or for healing. So maybe it was applied also for these purposes, to have some kind of protection against evil influences here in this mummy. And the one on the right side, the black and white images, is a very interesting finding from colleagues from the British Museum. They have some mummies from the pre-dynastic period from Gebelen in Egypt, which dates almost the same time as the Iceman, who's 3000 BCE, so 5000 years ago. And they could show, with the use of using infrared and ultraviolet imaging techniques, that they had also tattoos here on the arm, on the shoulder, which look more like numbers or symbols. It looks like SL. Also, the meaning is not quite clear in this case, but also there, these are with Ötzi, the oldest tattoos we have now in the world. With this, in the next slide, I will now talk about Ötzi, the Iceman. Just a few basic things about him. He was found 30 years ago. We just celebrated his anniversary in the 19th September. He was found by two German hikers popping out of the ice in the glacier, and it was not clear from the beginning that he was really an ancient mummy. This you see in the next slide. This is actually the forensic doctor that was called when the Iceman was found by the hikers, and he said, well, I just can say he died already some time ago, and he couldn't tell that he's already, what we found out later, more than 5000 years old. The next slide, there were also two very famous mountaineers. Maybe most of you know Reinhold Messner here on the right, maybe one of the most famous mountaineers who climbed on all 8,000 meters mountains. He was there at the time period close by, and he came by, and he was one of the first person who said, well, the equipment seems to be very old and old-fashioned, so maybe this person died really several thousand years ago. And it turned out that he was right. In the next slide, you see that the Iceman mummy is now, after some period in Austria, at the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology. He is preserved there and shown with all his equipment. He's conserved in a special chamber to recreate a bit the glacier, the ice where he was kept for more than 5000 years, and really preserved almost perfectly. In the next slide, you see some basic results about him. Obviously, I cannot now go too much into detail, but we know a lot about him. We really can kind of reconstruct a CV of the Iceman. We know that he lived 3300 years BCE. He was about 40 to 50 years when he died. He had a body height of 160. His weight was about 50 to 60 kilograms. We also know that he grew up and lived in northern Italy. This was based on stable isotope analysis of his tissue. We also know that he was killed. It was actually a murder case. He was killed by an arrowhead. You see there in the right center image, you even see the arrowhead still inside the body that actually killed him. So it's a murder case. We also know that he died in late spring based on pollen analysis. And we know that there's a lot of health problems like degenerative diseases of spine, of joints, of the knees. This is important later when we'll have a look at the tattoos. And he also had intestinal parasites. You see a parasite egg that was found in his intestines on the upper right side of this slide. In the next slide, we now talking about tattoos. This was also a very surprising finding, but also recognized obviously immediately that there are tattoos on the bodies. And if you put on the next slide, we see also how they looked like. There were very simple tattoos, not as we have seen before, these decorative tattoos or that with symbols or animals, something like that. These were mainly very simple, let's say, stripes that were applied in parallel. You see here these two groups, one with 4 parallel stripes and the second one with each 3 parallel stripes applied to his lumbar spine. And actually, it was only not quite clear from the beginning how many tattoos are there exactly, because some of the tattoos are hardly visible with the naked eye because they have almost the same color as his skin, and he has a quite dark skin. And so we decided to do a multispectral photographic imaging of the whole body. So we photographed the whole mummy with this technique, and then we could detect all tattoos that are present on the mummy. And it turned out that we have a total of 61 tattoos. So if we count every single stripe as a separate tattoo, and they are arranged in 19 groups. So one group is like on the left, these 4 stripes together is one group, and the other 2 are also defined as one group. And you see on the right upper images where these tattoos are all located. So they're mainly on the legs, on the lower spine. But in the next slide, you see that we also detected, and this was completely new, not noticed before, a tattoo on the right chest. You see this area on the left, and you can really not recognize it if you just look with your eyes. But if you, let's say, apply this special photographic technique that is also used for paintings, for example, if you want to understand if you have another painting under the visible painting, we could see that there are also several stripes applied on the right rib cage to the mummy. So this was the latest tattoo we found, and now we are quite sure that we have noticed all tattoos. The next slide. This is an overview of all tattoos. So I told you that they're mainly these parallel stripes, but we have also 2 crosses. You see this as T08 and T11 in the 3rd row of this slide. The 2 crosses are one on the knee and one on the ankle. So they're also on the legs. So these are only that are slightly different from the other tattoos, but still they are quite, let's say, simple and not really depict something, even if you could call these 2 crosses for sure a kind of the picture of a cross, but these are mainly stripes and simple tattoos compared to the other tattoos we have seen on the other mummies. Next slide, please. So the big question was for sure, why were the Iceman tattoos applied and how were they applied? And for this, there were some analysis done on the tattoos. So there were little samples taken out of the skin, and it was then analyzed how the ink was composed, and it turned out that it was a soot from the campfire most likely, and it was the skin was either poke or maybe cut because they already have these blades made of flintstone. So it was also possible to cut the skin or even poke the skin with these bone needles. Also, Ötzi had in his equipment, and then the suit was rubbed in. And in some of these tattoos, there were also found some crystals, silicate crystals like quartz, that shows that maybe derived from the campfire, that there were little stones incorporated and also rubbed into the tattoos. And that's why the tattoos are also, they were applied quite deep into the skin. So they are real tattoos, permanent tattoos. So they stayed. And that's why we learned how the tattoos were applied. And in the next slide, there's now the question, what was the idea or why were the tattoos applied? And we know some people had the idea that it was a kind of acupuncture, a kind of treatment, because it turned out that several of the tattoos, 9 out of these 19 groups, were really close or even exactly on traditional acupuncture points. And 2 groups were even located on so-called meridians that are used in acupuncture medicine or in Chinese medicine. And one of these crosses on the left ankle is even regarded as a so-called master point for the treatment of back pain, and others are more linked to the treatment of intestinal pains. And this could quite fit well to what we know from his body. And when you can show the next slide, please, that he actually had a lot of health problems. Now the positions are a bit moved of the rings, but it doesn't matter. So he had a lot of, as I said before, degenerative disease. in particular of the lower spine, of the knee joint. And this is all the areas where these tattoos were applied. And even the tattoo on the chest could be related probably to the intestinal parasites he had on the one hand. We also know that he has gallbladder stones. And more recently, we also found that he suffered from a stomach bacteria, so-called Helicobacter pylori, that is a very common still today. And maybe this could be an explanation that the tattoos were used as a kind of treatment. Next slide. And another interesting thing, we know that they had a kind of knowledge of traditional medicine, like they had also used this birch polypore. These are fungi that have some anti-inflammatory probabilities, so they can be used to treat fever or infections. So there was this knowledge. And in the next slide, you see that also in the stomach, we could found that they had used the birch, not the birch, the fern, the bracken fern here on the lower right. You see that they used a plant that is usually toxic if you eat it like this, but if you use it in smaller amounts or if you prepare it in a certain way, it can be used as a treatment against intestinal parasites. So in the next slide, so this as a kind of conclusion, or the question is now, was it more an art, the tattoos, or was maybe a therapy? So it's we really think that it's most likely a kind of treatment. So we're not really aware whether they had already knowledge of acupuncture in a more Chinese traditional sense, but it's very likely that they used it as a kind of treatment. Also, we cannot really say how effective it was or not. So this is something we try still to figure out. Also, it's quite difficult to address these questions. And so that's why we're still a bit under discussion what the exact meaning of these tattoos are and whether they were applied all at once or maybe in several sittings. So maybe they were not applied once because there are too many. So maybe they were repeated because the pain maybe then always came back when they were done. I think there's one more slide when I remember right. Yeah. So this is what I said. These are the open questions. So was it a common practice? Because we only have the Iceman, especially from this area where we're living, from the Alps. This is the only mummy we have, especially from this time period. We cannot really say whether it was effective or not, whether it was really an acupuncture treatment, and whether it was common to use this at that time, or what happened to this knowledge, because we know in more modern times in Europe, there was no more acupuncture or even tattooing practice. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Albert. That was great. We do have a couple questions that popped in yeah. So if anyone has any more, feel free to ask. But the first one is if you could talk a little bit more specifically about the kinds of ink or methods of tattooing, if other mummies were using similar techniques to the Iceman's tattoos, if there were other mediums that were used to actually build up the tattoos. What have y'all found over the course of all the mummies that you've studied?
Actually, most of them were made quite similar. So they're often used kind of needles or, let's say, poking instruments to prepare the tattoos. And they often used either soot or charcoal, or sometimes even plant material that was prepared to rub it into then the skin. So that was in most of the tattoos that were applied to mummies done in a quite similar way. Sometimes they used also some cutting devices like little knives or so to make incisions and then rub it. Unfortunately, not all mummies were studied in the same depth, so we don't have, let's say, done this analysis like this histological analysis where we took little samples from the tattoos in order to perfectly understand also how deep they were applied. Mm-hmm. So we cannot tell for every mummy in detail how it was used, but in general terms, it was always used, let's say, blend or charcoal soot material, and either by poking or making incisions, the tattoos were applied.
Interesting. And so, I mean, I know, Ötzi is, 5300 BCE, and he's the oldest natural mummy that we have. on a timeline, and this is answering a question that we got, what is the next oldest natural, or the next oldest natural mummy, I guess?
I have to say, Ötzi is not the oldest mummy in the world. So there are older mummies, also natural mummies, for example, in North and South America, especially in North America. They're not so well preserved. But from indigenous people in North America and South America, we have mummies that date back even 8,000 to 9,000 years. But there we don't have evidence for tattoos. So, and the next oldest mummies, so what I said, these pre-dynastic Egyptian mummies, they're also around 5,000 years. So very close to the Iceman. There we see also tattoos, which is also interesting. Also different types of tattoos. And not as in the Iceman. And then we have these mummies from in Asia dating back 3,000 to 4,000 years up to almost modern times. It's interesting that in modern times the mummies show less of these tattoos, so it seems to be a practice that was even more widespread in ancient times. So also we don't have, let's say, so many mummies that we really can tell how widespread it was. But it's very interesting, especially here in Europe. We have no other evidence for tattooing except the Iceman. This is a really interesting fact.
It is really interesting. So, I mean, you talked, I think, a little bit about this, but it seems like there's there's a distinction being made between the therapeutic tattoos or tattoos that would be used, and then there's also tattoos that reference imagery and might be specific to some sort of cultural something. But it also sounds like you found that there's some mummies that have both of those, both tattoos. Is there any like specific example that you can think of or you can talk about, and talk about the differences between what those tattoos look like?
Yeah, exactly, because it was always long believed that tattoos were mainly done for, let's say, artistic or ritual things or idea, also for the afterlife. Also in the Egyptian mummies, it was believed it was more done even for the afterlife. And also in this mummy I showed on this warrior mummies from Russia. And these are examples where we have both types of tattoos, because we really have these very artistic tattoos, these large scale depictions of animals, of mythological animals even, that resembles deers, but so maybe that were regarded as some even gods or very important creatures. And on the same mummies, we have then here just a kind of what looks more like a treatment on the really along the spine, on the back, just simple dots that we could imagine that it's a bit like in the Iceman, that maybe they were used to as a kind of treatment against maybe back pain, because we see a lot of these problems in these mummies, that they have back pain problems that maybe required also treatment. And we know also from now populations in Africa that they use a similar technique as a medicine to make incisions on the body when you have a pain in a certain area, then rub in some herbs and plants material. And this actually creates also another kind of pain that helps to overcome the other more severe pain. So it's a known treatment that is kind of creating these incisions, local incisions, that could help really to treat such kind of pain. And maybe it was really also applied in both ways. In some mummies, only a few show really evidence that we have both types of these tattoos.
Interesting. Well, I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing that we've run out the clock. So I want to just take this opportunity to thank you. And yeah, it just has been so great to have this conversation and to learn a little bit more. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.